All right, I'll go first. My name is Alex, and I'm a senior at Blair, and I'll be the first speaker for the pro team.
I'm Zoe. I go to Charlotte Latin, and I'll be second speaking for the pro.
I'm Claire. I'm a senior at Hawken, and I'm speaking first for the con.
Hi, I'm Vedanth. I'm second speaking for the neg, and I'm a senior at Bel Air.
All right, with that being said, I will be keeping time. I don't think we're too concerned if speeches go a few seconds over, but thank you all for coming. And we're gonna go ahead and let the neg kick it off. So make sure you have your pens and paper, and let's get this started. We're gonna give a brief round analysis after the fact, and we can answer any questions about the round and things like that. But in the meantime, let's let Claire kick it off.
Cool. Is everyone debating good? Sick. All right. We negate resolved on balance the benefits of urbanization in West Africa outweigh the harms. Contention 1 is an unsustainable path. Majorland 18 finds that West Africa is on a path of sustainable agricultural expansion, much like the rest of the world, developing complex agricultural production systems where extended families were self-sufficient for their daily needs. Agricultural growth is the best course of economic growth. The FAO 12 finds in sub-Saharan Africa, agricultural growth is 11 times more effective in reducing poverty than non-agricultural growth. Unfortunately, West African urbanization turned the region into a resource exploitation-driven economy. Indeed, Pharrell 18 finds that urbanization and oil go hand in hand, as Nigeria's urban transportation was able to take off because of an increase in oil production, where urban city centers served as hubs for global oil trade. Unfortunately, urbanization has only perpetuated the oil sector, creating a never-ending loop of urban expansion and oil exports. The World Bank 16 explains that Nigeria is dependent on oil for over 90% of its export revenues. As a result, oil dependence has left the economy highly vulnerable to drops in crude oil prices and has also left cities with limited job creation and access to basic services. The World Bank 17 finds that natural resource exports are locked in cycles of boom-bust, exposed to higher prices of volatility that reduce investment in physical and human capital, constraining economic growth. For example, in 2014, when oil prices crashed, total capital inflows in Nigeria decreased by 75.7%. The impact is destruction of long-term growth. Overall, any economic gain in oil-driven economies is canceled out by the inevitable bust of oil prices, which is why Kakanov 18 finds that a 10% increase in the nation's oil share reduces GDP by 7% over the long term. Even worse, Patrick of the Atlantic 12 writes that because resource-dependent countries concentrate wealth into the hands of the rich, these countries are characterized by high poverty and income inequality. Contention 2 is disease outbreaks. Currently, disease outbreaks are the leading health problem and cause of death in West Africa, with 90% of yellow fever cases causing 30,000 deaths each year in the region, regular influenza outbreaks taking up to 40,000 lives annually, and much more, causing a loss of 25% of total life expectancy for West Africans. Urbanization facilitates disease outbreaks in two ways. Firstly, through low-quality housing. University of Lincoln 19 finds that rapid urbanization, particularly in Africa, creates new types of suburban settlements, informal self-built settlements, and refugee camps that are densely populated, poorly planned, and lack health infrastructure and are out of sight of government authorities. These conditions are widespread, as Lal 20 writes that over 60% of the region's urban population lives in low-quality housing. Unfortunately, Kudus 20 explains that rural migrants who settle in slums often bring domesticated animals with them, including pets and livestock, leading to the circulation of communicable diseases. He adds that slums are unregulated, have congested conditions, are overcrowded, positions near open sewers are often restricted to dangerous areas with industrial hazards. The close proximity between animals and humans in low-quality housing poses a huge problem, as Bet 20 writes that 3/4 of emerging human infection disease outbreaks originate from viruses in animals that then jump species to infect humans, like COVID-19, for example. Critically, the probability of disease outbreaks transmitted through urban slums are high, as Bookley 19 explains that poor, crowded cities with limited health systems are ideal incubators for outbreaks of emerging infections, like the Ebola epidemic in West Africa in 2014 and in the Congo in 2018. These secondary urbanization leads to disease outbreaks through poor water treatment and sanitation. Swarovski 20 finds that urbanization in West Africa has led to a situation where the capacity to treat wastewater is exceeded and only part of water is treated. This wastewater is widely used for irrigation and gardening, which leaches bacteria into the surrounding environment and food production. The sanitation is so bad that cited by Wang 14 quantified that 79% of water wells in West Africa showed moderate to heavy fecal contamination. That's why Penalt 19 finds that only a quarter of people in the region have any access to clean drinking water. The WHO in 15 makes it clear that urbanization is bad for disease control, writing that Ebola in West Africa was largely confined when in remote rural areas, while cities have been epicenters of intense virus transmission. The WHO concludes that West African outbreaks demonstrate how swiftly the virus could move once it reached urban settings and densely populated slums. The impact is disease outbreaks. Urbanization is exacerbating these serious problems of infectious diseases outbreaks in West Africa, especially for children. Devastatingly, Sangen 19 quantifies that deaths from infectious diseases like cholera, pneumonia, measles, and meningitis account for 54% of all deaths among young children in West Africa, over 180,000 deaths per year. The WHO quantifies that infectious diseases in West Africa will kill 28 million additional people in the next decade. For all of these reasons and more, we proudly negate.
So there were some comments that were going a little bit fast. So what I'm going to do is after both cases, I'm going to give a quick rundown of the cases, just so if you missed anything, you can hear it from me. Obviously, we have limited time and we want to make sure that we can get some of the best arguments in there. So that's why it's a little bit speedy. We'll slow it down in future speeches. But for those of you that are just joining us and those of you that wanted some clarification, the first argument on the con is an unsustainable path. The argument is that West Africa was on a path to agricultural expansion, which is very good because it's better at reducing poverty. Unfortunately, an urban transition in countries like Nigeria led to an increase in oil production. The two go hand in hand. And because of that, Nigeria is dependent on oil for 90% of their export revenues. This is bad because basically their economy follows the line of how oil is doing. For example, in 2014, oil prices crashed. Nigeria lost 76% of their capital inflows. The long-term impact is a reduction in GDP. A 10% increase in a nation's oil shares reduced GDP by 7%. The second contention was a little bit slower, but it is disease outbreaks. First, through low-quality housing. When people are closer together and bring their animals into urban areas, it leads to the spread of disease and also the creation of disease. 3/4 of human infectious diseases come from animals and humans in close-knit areas. The second warrant is on water contamination. There's poor water treatment in urban areas in West Africa, and poor water treatment leads to heavy fecal contamination, which makes up something like 1/4 of all diseases that are created. The impact is disease outbreaks, similar to pandemics. They can kill 28 million people. And I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to let the pro go ahead.
All right. 1 second. All right, I'll start now. We affirm resolved. On balance, the benefits of urbanization in West Africa outweigh the harms. Contention 1 is the economy. The World Bank in 19 quantifies that 82% of Africans, or 413 million people that live in extreme poverty, are in rural areas. The International Fund for Agricultural Development furthers that poverty in West Africa is strictly a rural phenomenon, with 75% of poverty occurring in rural areas. And Score 9 furthers that in Ghana, rural poverty is 6 times that of urban poverty. Fortunately, urbanization promotes economic growth in 2 ways. First is by facilitating labor specialization. Turok 14 explains that urbanization clusters people in cities, which brings in a large pool of workers and allows for specialization and division of labor. In short, people of different skill sets are able to specialize in specific tasks, which boosts productivity and efficiency. That's why Glaser of Harvard in 16 finds that a 20% increase in urbanization is associated with more than a doubling of per capita income. Second is through economies of scale. Turok 14 writes that in urbanized cities, companies can take advantage of shared infrastructure with others like transportation linkages, logistics networks, and telecommunication systems. This increases productivity for companies, drives down costs, and boosts production, thus increasing profits, which feeds back into the economy to drive growth. These 2 warrants serve to change the very structure of West African economies, and this effect is empirically verified, as the World Bank in 18 finds that over 80% of Burkina Faso's income per capita growth in the last decade has been directly due to structural changes as a result of urbanization. There are 2 impacts. First is job creation. Urbanization in West Africa has led to a boom in small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, which have greatly benefited from both specialization and economies of scale. Critically, COO 19 indicates that SMEs in West Africa are key for job creation and incomes, particularly for low-skilled workers, as they account for over 70% of all employment in Nigeria. Not only that, but compared to rural jobs, Veranda 19 writes that urbanization creates opportunities for jobs that both pay more and are more diverse. And Harvard 16 reveals that Africa's most urbanized areas result in 20% more employment, 21% more production, and a 34% larger service economy than less populated regions. This leads to the second impact, which is poverty. Rates of economic growth in West Africa are crucial for alleviating poverty, as Bahoria 08 quantifies that a 1% decline in developing country growth rates traps an additional 20 million people in poverty, and CARS 20 furthers that rural poverty in Africa is expected to decline by 26%, over 100 million over the next decade due to urbanization. Fortunately, the African Development Bank finds that driven by economic growth, income per capita has more than doubled in 23 African nations since 1990, and life expectancy has increased by nearly 57%. Contention 2 is health. Urbanization allows for people to more rapidly access health infrastructure such as hospitals and get access to medical specialists. Stracer 16 contextualizes that nowhere is the worldwide shortage of health professionals more pronounced than in rural areas of developing countries. That's why Strasser continues that compared to their urban counterparts, rural inhabitants experience lower life expectancy and poor health status. Centralized health infrastructure is a key benefit of urbanization, as Atena 20 explains. The provision of medical services in rural areas is sparse or non-existent due to a lack of infrastructure. In contrast, major cities are more likely to have good medical facilities, university hospitals, and specialist care centers. The impact is maternal mortality. Yaya 18 contextualizes that West Africa has among the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, being over 27 times higher than Europe. Currently, the WHO estimates that over 300,000 maternal deaths occur every year, or over 800 per day. Crucially, Saka 20 furthers that the usage of medical assistance in medical facilities during childbirth is critical for reducing maternal mortality. However, there's a large disparity between rural and urbanized areas, as the utilization of skilled delivery services in rural areas in Ghana was lower than that of urbanized cities by 31%. Thankfully, she estimates that if there were skilled birth attendants at all deliveries in Ghana, maternal mortality would decrease by up to 33%. And the WHO estimates that overall, up to 98% of maternal deaths can be avoided with timely access to existing medical interventions. For all those reasons and more, we're more than proud to affirm.
All right, so that was probably a little bit slower, but I'm still going to give a really quick breakdown of the AF before they go into crossfire. So there's a few things. First of all, the first contention is the economy. Their argument is that 82% that live in extreme poverty are in rural areas. That's 413 million people. And poverty in West Africa, specifically 75% of poverty is in rural areas. Their argument is that urbanization promotes economic growth in two ways. First is labor specialization. Simplistically, the argument is that large groups of people in an urban area leads to specialization and division of labor, i.e. 5 people are plumbers and 5 people do internet stuff. The argument is that, and then they conclude that a 20% increase in urbanization is associated with a doubling of per capita income. The second warrant for economy is economies of scale. Companies take advantage of shared infrastructure like Verizon and AT&T using the same cell towers. And because of that, there has been income per capita growth and productivity increases. There's two impacts. First is job creation. I think that speaks for itself. Second is poverty. I think that also speaks for itself. The second contention is public health. Some simplistics of this argument is that in urban areas, people have better access to health infrastructure and they can more rapidly be treated. The impact specifically is maternal mortality because without having specialized maternal care for pregnancies, there's a much higher chance of mortality. West Africa has the highest maternal mortality, 27 times higher than Europe. 300,000 maternal deaths occur every single day, or every year, sorry, 800 per day. But with healthcare, it is a lot better. All right, I'm going to leave it at that, and then let's go to crossfire.
So really quickly, I heard my mic isn't doing too well, so I joined on a different device, and I was wondering if you're able to allow me to unmute on that device.
Word, what's it called?
It's called Alex Jiang 2.
Yeah, give me a sec. All right, you should be good. Are you good, Alex?
All right, can everyone hear me better now?
Yeah, you're
Much
better.
Awesome. All right, let me just mute myself. All right. Is it echoing still?
Yeah, you're gonna have to turn off volume for one of them.
Oh shoot, which one? Let's see.
Turn the volume off in your computer,
All right.
initial one.
Hello?
You still have volume on both of them. You're gonna have to turn off the volume on one of them.
All right, what about now? Oh my god.
It's still there.
It's still there.
One second. Okay, now it should be good.
Yeah, that's better.
Awesome. All right.
Cool. Ready?
Yeah, you can take the first question.
All right. So how long has urbanization been happening in West Africa?
Well, it's been happening for decades, but only recently West Africa started to accelerate its pace of urbanization.
Okay, but the recently is still in like within the last decade, right?
Yeah, most of it within the last decade.
Okay, so if urbanization has been going on for so long and it is so beneficial for health infrastructure, like you say, then why is evidence from 2018 still say that there are 300,000 or 30,000 deaths from maternal mortality every year in West Africa?
Yeah, so the reason why is, as I mentioned before, West Africa still hasn't fully urbanized yet. We're on pace to urbanizing more and more, and we've seen over the years that maternal deaths has actually declined as urbanization rates have increased. So whereas there might be a lot of deaths now, our argument is that in the future, when West Africa continues to urbanize, it will decrease a lot more. All right, can I ask a question?
Yep.
So before urbanization happened, there were still a lot of, outbreaks, a lot of diseases, right, in rural Africa. So there were still like some, right?
Right, but the magnitude was different.
Yeah. So how are the people who are affected by those diseases able to respond?
So the difference between the how it responds is like the need for a response in the first place, right? So the diseases that started in rural areas obviously didn't have the same magnitude as epidemics like Ebola, and thus didn't need as large of a response. So if there was for example, a disease that starts in a rural area, that would be more localized because they're not interacting with more people.
Yeah, but
need as large a response, right?
I understand that,
So-
but even considering the fact that a lot of these diseases are localized, there's still a lot of people who are going to be affected because, a lot of outbreaks are not necessarily spread from human to human. For example, malaria is one example that's spread through mosquito bites, and that has affected rural areas way more than urban areas, and rural areas haven't been able to respond.
But it's worse in urban areas though, because people are so densely populated. That's
yeah, but the example I gave of malaria is
Like a question?
from human to human contact, of course.
Okay. So on your argument about labor specialization, you say that when you have urbanization, you can specialize labor for people with low skill jobs, right?
Yeah.
So if someone is a low skilled worker, right? How can they access these specialized jobs?
Yeah, so in cities, there's a lot of low skilled jobs that are in cities that, for example, you can work in factories and do a specific task over and over again. The point is that in these cities, there's a lot of different businesses, and even low skilled workers can target one business and develop a specialization catered to that business, which allows the business to be more productive.
But your argument is about creating new businesses, right? So if you're a low skill worker, how can you all of a sudden create a new business or access this economy of scale if you have no skills?
So part of it is about creating businesses. Another part is that, there's of course non-low skill workers who created businesses, right? And they hire a lot of low skill workers who can specialize in whatever they're, manufacturing or making.
Andrew, are you gonna give or do I just go? Is that
No,
alerting?
we're gonna let it go from here on out. I was just updating people on the case.
Okay. Oh, it'll be straight down for everyone flying. On their first contention about economic growth, 3 top shelf responses. 1, the Mandine evidence finds in the most expansive study given to you in the round is that the correlation between GDP and urbanization is negative, meaning the more urbanization that happens, the less GDP a country is going to have. The warrant comes from Page, who indicates that people that are in urbanized areas or in urban areas have higher living costs than those in suburban or rural areas, meaning that they're paying more for every good and service that they're getting. Second, Oxfam finds that all the benefits of economic growth that they're talking about, like the job creation, is actually going to people that are rich as opposed to people that are poor. Because in like oil economies that we talk about in our first contention, the elites control the economy and get all the benefits from it. Finally, the Hallaj evidence indicates that in every West African country has a housing crisis. In Nigeria, they're missing 17 million units. Two implications. One, homelessness is really bad as it increases the chance of death by 6 times. And second, it traps people in poverty and they can't afford things like transportation, meaning they can't get to their job or even find a job in the first place. But then on the argument about like labor specialization, the evidence doesn't give you a warrant as to why like labor proximity is needed for like specialization. For example, technology that they're probably going to get in the long term means that they don't need like proximity in terms of labor anyways. That's why Majerman finds that there was specialization in jobs before urbanization even happened in West Africa. Then on the second thing about economies of scale, the Marx evidence indicates that the reason infrastructure is not going to happen either ways is because even if urbanization happens, the governments aren't planning new infrastructure projects, which means that people aren't going to get, or businesses aren't going to be able to reap the benefits of the infrastructure that they talk about. On the impact, the Hallaj evidence continues that in Nigeria, they're expecting an increase in poverty and they're expecting an increase in unemployment. That's really important because it shows that urbanization is not solving because these things are still happening anyways. But when it comes to like labor proximity and infrastructure proximity, our first contention solves better anyways. Labor proximity and infrastructure proximity is not needed for an agriculture economy anyways. This economic growth that they talk about is probably going to happen no matter what. A couple of reasons why you prefer us, and the first is the long term. For oil shocks, our evidence indicates that because of oil shocks, which would happen when you vote for them, it means that economic growth and economic progress is going to be stunted every so 10 years. But second is probability. In 2014, there was an oil crisis in Nigeria and they lost 76% of their capital flow. That wouldn't happen with an agricultural economy. All right, let's go to the second contention that talks about public health. A couple of responses. One, the WHO finds that the reason that they're not going to have access to good health anyways is because there aren't enough doctors in West Africa, which means that even if you give them greater access to like infrastructure, there aren't anyone inside of these infrastructure to actually treat them, which means that they're not getting help no matter what. But second, the Foyle evidence indicates that the people that despite like getting more health infrastructure, there's not enough health insurance that these people have, which means that they can't afford the health that they need anyways. Third, Montgomery finds that even though there might be good quality hospitals, there's not enough hospitals, which means that even if you were to put people in urbanized areas, there's not enough hospitals for them to go to in the first place. They're still going to be far away from all the hospitals that they talk about. If anything, you're just going to overbear these hospitals and make them have lower quality work anyways. Fourthly, we would say urbanization is probably really bad when it comes to diseases because it creates a breeding ground for all the diseases that they talk about. For example, when people interact more, they bring diseases with them. There's going to be more diseases in a centralized area as opposed to if it was just uncentralized. It also means that there's going to be less diseases spreading overall. Finally, you can turn the argument because the Hella evidence indicates that urbanization leads to more people using more unclean sources of energy, and that's empirically proven in West Africa. That's really, really bad because it leads to air pollution, which is much worse than their case when you go to the weighing. For example, in Africa, 780,000 people die of air pollution every single year, but the maternal deaths that they talk about only kill 300,000 people per year. Our housing argument also comes before this argument because when you're homeless, you're also more likely to contract a disease than if you weren't homeless. For all these reasons, we're proud to negate.
Okay, so if everyone's good, I'm going to frontline our case first and then respond to theirs. Okay. Their first response to our first contention that living costs are higher, which means that people don't benefit from urbanization. Even if this were true, Glazer from Case finds that just a 20% increase in urbanization is associated with more than a doubling of per capita income, which is plenty to cover increased costs. But second, if living costs caused any large-scale harms, we'd see people being worse off, but that's not true. The ADB evidence finds that life expectancy in urban areas has increased 57%. Second, on inequality. Compared to inequality with urban areas, inequality between urban and rural poverty is much more pronounced, with 75% of poverty occurring in rural areas. Ending this inequality is the best way to reduce poverty overall. Third, on low quality housing. When urbanization happens, housing and infrastructure follow. Look to India, where infrastructure caught up within a few decades of rapid urbanization. The problem is self-rectifying in the long term. Their argument has no impact. Fourth, on the D-link, prefer our evidence because theirs is not specific to West Africa. The African Development Bank finds that in the time of urbanization, income per capita has more than doubled in 23 African nations and life expectancy has increased by nearly 57%. Clearly, urbanization works. Fifth, on water pollution, their link from urbanization to water pollution is super uncontextualized. Don't vote here. There's not an impact anyways. Go to the impact turns on healthcare. First, on the first turn, child mortality might be lower in rural areas, but overall mortality in both mothers and adults is higher because there are no hospitals to treat injury and disease. On the second turn, their evidence about air pollution is awful. It talks about burning biomass in rural, not urban areas. The rest of their turns are just cross applications of their disease contention, which I'll get to then on their case. At that point, let's go to their case. On their first argument, an oil-dependent region. First, let's do the comparative. Our link into poverty is much better in the long term. Every developed economy has strong economies of scale, whereas less developed economies rely more on agriculture, which is generally more rural. Second, a fully agricultural economy is not a good thing in the long term. Climate change is inevitable and crops are slowly going to die out. Prefer an economy that uses a variety of natural resources, not just crops. Third, the thesis of their argument is just wrong. Oil dependence and the acquisition of oil as part of the economy are two different things. For example, Nigeria became reliant on oil because the government didn't pass diversification policies. Urbanization solves for all the 15 other countries because Levine 14 finds that urbanized central areas have higher political engagement and stronger institutions, allowing them to pass diversification policies to prevent dependence in the long term. Fourth, there is actually no warrant as to why Nigeria's oil resources displace agricultural production. Nigeria does both. The ITI 20 finds as of this year that Nigeria's agricultural production are up 73% over the past decade. Clearly, they are diversified, which bolsters the economy. On their second contention about diseases, a few general responses first. First, you can turn it because if we win that C2 of public health is improving, we win this argument. That's because urban dwellers have better access to healthcare and diseases are more easily treated. But second, their case is terminally non-unique. Diseases are going to happen no matter what. Myers in 20 finds that if urbanization in Africa causes disease outbreaks, then urbanization will cause global pandemics as well. However, this actually becomes offense for us because treatment for disease is only possible in urban areas. Indeed, Equal Times in 2015 finds that in Nigeria, for example, more than 82% of the rural population is excluded from healthcare services due to insufficient numbers of healthcare workers compared to 37% in urban areas. Third is terminal defense because disease transmission is much lower in urban areas. For example, Robert in 03 finds that malaria transmission rates are nearly 7% in city centers, 46% in peripheral urban centers, and 168% in rural areas. This is because disease are more likely to be transmitted because of lower sanitation standards. This becomes offense for us as Simon 05 finds that urbanization led to significant significant decreases in morbidity and mortality from malaria. This turn outweighs everything on their side on scope because malaria takes millions of lives globally. Vote here if everything else is messy. Fourth, let's do the comparative. Our Stracer evidence in case is very clear that rural habitants have poorer health, and Atina finds that major cities are more likely to have better medical facilities, university hospitals, and specialist care centers. This also responds to the argument that they make on our case, which says that urban areas don't have doctors because it's a lot better than rural areas, which is the comparative they don't explain in their rebuttal.
Okay, we'll take a little bit of prep before cross. Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, yeah.
Okay. I think your Glaser evidence said something about like a 2 times increase in per capita income and like a 20% increase in urbanization.
Yeah.
So like, can you explain what a 20% increase in urbanization looks like?
I think it's just like the land area covered with buildings and like the number of people who move there. So it's like a combination of those factors.
Okay. And do you know where the study is like looking at for like when it's correlating per capita income and urbanization?
I'm pretty sure West Africa. If not, it's just like Africa as the continent. But yeah, we say that just the general thesis of our case is just that urbanization is good for helping the economy and giving people jobs and that kind of thing, which is like true no matter where you are in the world.
Okay, you can take a question.
Okay. So I guess on your case about like oil dependency, so like how much is urbanization going to increase dependence on the oil sector?
So our argument, I mean, I can't give you like a number. It's going to vary between each country and what their economy was before urbanization happened. But our argument is that when the economies of scale and like the labor specialization, like when labor comes in proximity and then you get a lot of economies of scale, like you talk about in your case, our argument is that that causes an economy and government to shift more towards the oil sector and away from agriculture sector. So like it doesn't really matter how much they do it. Insofar as they are doing it, means that we're still getting, I guess, clean offense on our case.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Let's go like just the whole disease debate thing. So all these turns that you talk about, so like every single one of your turns is about how the app solves disease, right? So like for example, you're
Well, not
introducing.
necessarily. Well, yeah, the turns are about how we solve, but like that you have to combine that with a non-unique, which says that diseases are going to happen regardless of whether you have urban centers or not.
Okay, so there's a multitude of different things that you need for people to get rid of their disease. They have to be able to access the health infrastructure. They have to access a health professional. They have to be able to afford the health professional. If
Sure.
one of those things is missing, it means that they don't get cured, right?
Well, not necessarily. I think it's more of a scalar increase. Like if you have access to a few of those things, like for example, if you get treatment once, it's a lot of the time it's better to mitigate your symptoms than like never having gotten treatment at all.
Okay, so let's say I live near a hospital, right, in an urbanized area, but I
Sure.
don't have enough money to afford a health professional. Can I get cured of whatever disease I have?
Okay, so like a few problems with that. One is you're not doing the comparative between like rural and urban areas. We say that access to infrastructure is a lot worse in rural areas. Also, we say that people are able to afford access to healthcare in urban areas because wages and incomes are higher.
Okay, you can take
So like theoretically your argument would be true, but that's not what's happening right now.
Okay.
I think that's about time. So good.
All right. I actually forgot one thing, so I'm gonna call Claire one more time and we'll be back.
Okay. Oh. Okay. So the order is going to be weighing our side, their side. Okay. Are y'all ready? Or anyone not ready? Cool. Start with the weighing from rebuttal. Our case terminate weighs theirs in two ways. First is on long-term growth. Kakanoff finds a 10% increase in the nation's oil share reduces GDP by 7% over the long term. Second on probability. We know for a fact that an oil-dependent West Africa is unstable and dangerous. Look at the 2014 oil crisis, for example, when Nigeria lost 76% of all its capital inflow, essentially crippling the nation for half of a decade. Go to our first contention about oil-dependent West Africa. Our argument is very simple. Urbanization locked West Africa into an oil-dependent state where 90% of capital inflows and trade came from oil exports. This destroys and destroys any long-term hope of economic growth and long-term growth, as oil historically follows a boom and bust cycle with no long-term profit, incredibly high volatility. The impact is destruction of growth. The W finds Nigeria dependent on oil for 90% of its exports, leaving the economy vulnerable to price shocks. Kakanoff continues that oil-driven economies are killed by regular oil busts, resulting in 7% decrease in GDP in the long term, which halts wages, spikes poverty, and breeds inequality. They give a few responses. On the first response about poverty reduction is better. That's not true. Agricultural growth is the best way for economic growth. As FAO finds it in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, agricultural growth is 11 times more effective in reducing poverty than non-agricultural growth. Second, on long-term agriculture, our argument isn't that the economy stays agrarian for decades. For example, our argument is that the agricultural economies are a launch pad for diversified for countries like the West and China in the late 1800s, for example. Third, they say that oil dependence acquisition is different. Clearly, they aren't, because Nigeria, the biggest nation in West Africa, is reliant on oil for 90% of its exports, and Ghana and Liberia boosting oil exports as we speak. For on this response, Nigeria's agriculture exports are up. It doesn't matter how much they've increased percentage-wise, because our argument is that urbanization destroyed long-term hopes of diversification. But even then, our evidence that 90% reliance from oil from 2020. So even with boosting agriculture, Nigeria is still fully reliant on oil exports. Go to their disease turns. They're on the top. Our contention outweighs their turns, because even if healthcare access is marginally lower, this doesn't matter because diseases don't spread in the first place. That's why our WHO evidence finds that Ebola in West Africa was largely confined when in remote rural areas. Second, other offense about healthcare improving terminal defense, as 60% of urban populations lives in slums with unsanitary conditions, overpopulated living spaces, and poor access to healthcare. Even if there is some health infra, those who need it the most still don't access it. Go to their case. There's a few reasons why you can't vote for their C1. First, because urban areas are merely just a mirage of better living. Marino 8 finds there's a negative correlation between GDP and urbanization. New citizens are on average poor. The warrant is from page 25 that urban living costs are much higher depleting savings. For example, goods are 30% more expensive and housing costs are 55% more. On their frontline, their wages are higher and they can afford it. This list of response is just wildly untrue. One, what is a 20% increase in urbanization? And B, clearly doubling wages doesn't reach everyone, as slums still exist in major cities. But second, extend the term. There's a clean place. This is a clean place to vote, because it identifies the root of the problem of urbanization. Even when cities pop up, poverty doesn't change just because costs skyrocket. Second, extend the income inequality turn. Economic growth in urban areas goes to the top 1%. The warrant is from Oxfam 19 finds that inequality in West Africa is reaching extreme highs. The wealthiest 1% own the majority of capital in the region. This is the reason why West Africa's GDP has risen 6.4%, but GDP per capita is just 1.9%. On their front line, the urban rural poverty difference is worse. Of course, it's worse. Obviously, they meant to be our argument, because urbanization is the wealthiest 1% are getting richer, increasing inequality from urban rural standpoint. The impact of inequality is crumbling nations. Rotor 16 finds that inequalities prevent a reduction in poverty, increase violent tension, stunt investment, innovation, and long-term growth. Thus, a vote pro not just ignores West Africa's past, but also dooms its future, which is why it's a very, very clean neg ballot.
Okay, Alex and I are going to take some prep.
But really quickly, what was the last response you read? Summarize.
Yeah, the last was the impact off the turn.
Okay.
Broader evidence.
All right. Can everyone hear me? So the order of my speech is going to be the weighing, then our C1, and then their C1. All right. Time starts now. start on weighing. Our C1 outweighs theirs in 3 ways. First is scope. SMEs have created 70% of jobs in Nigeria, offering millions a way to generate income and lift themselves out of poverty. The neg never tells you how many people they affect. Second is historical precedent. Income per capita has more than doubled in 23 African nations since 1990, and the key cause is urbanization. This responds to their probability weighing because despite changes in oil price, West Africa still has a growing economy. And third is time frame. CARS 20 indicates that rural poverty in Africa will decline by over 100 million over the next decade due to specifically urbanization. This also responds to their time frame analysis because urbanization is ending poverty at its roots in rural areas over the next decade. Onto case. They extend 2 responses in summary. First is the higher living costs turn. 2 responses. A, our argument is that urbanization has increased over 20%. That's why the African Development Bank finds that income per capita has more than doubled since 1990s. And B, this isn't offense. At best, they're arguing that there's no income increase in urban areas, but that wages go to goods and housing. Second is the income inequality turn. This turn makes absolutely no sense because A, job creation and wage growth in urban areas is specifically for low-skilled workers. That's our co-evidence about SMEs growing in West Africa. But B, more diverse job creation allows for more opportunities in multiple sectors with high wages and more productive employment. That being said, extend our C1. The disparity between rural and urban areas regarding poverty is huge, and the key reason is economic growth. The Turok evidence in our labor specialization warrant explains that when people cluster in cities, they can more easily get to work and actually do specialized work that they're good at, which boosts productivity and efficiency. The key reason you're casting an AF ballot is the Glaser evidence, which indicates that a 20% increase in urbanization doubles per capita income, which is why the CARS evidence finds that urbanization will lift 100 million people out of poverty over the next decade. We are winning our case and the weighing, so the round is essentially over. But if that's not enough, go to their case. There's 2 reasons why you can vote for their C1. First, a fully agricultural dependent economy isn't good long term. They say it's a launching pad for diversification in the long term. That may have been true for China, but in the unique scenario of West Africa, it's not because of climate change. Crops are going to die out. They say that agriculture is better for reducing poverty. That's fine, but agriculture is literally dying. We're at the point of no return, and nations need alternatives to create long-term growth. Second, because Nigeria is diversifying. The ITA 20 finds that as of this year, Nigeria's agricultural exports are up 93% over the past decade. Clearly, they are diversified, which bolsters the economy. They say 90% reliance in 2020. That's not true. Their evidence is from 2016, looking at data from 2015. And over the past half decade, Nigeria and other West African nations have diversified investments and boosted other sectors. This is terminal defense on their case because despite everything that they're going to try to tell you, Nigeria has continued to diversify and move away from oil, becoming an economic powerhouse with urbanization. Quickly on health, don't vote for it. They never extend their argument in summary. They only extend the weighing, so there's no offense there. It's a clear out ballot.
Everyone good?
Grand cross.
Claire, do you want first question?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Y'all ready? Cool. So you say that on your T1 that like low skill jobs are going to increase and like that's what will decrease poverty in the long term. Like even though that's your warrant and urbanization is going on for a long time, like why is it still true that there have been massive increases in GDP, but there have not been actual increases in like income per capita? Like in the real world, like for example, like we give you the empiric that income per capita has only increased by like just 2% when GDP has increased like more than 6%. So how is your link like actually true?
Yeah, so our evidence finds that in 23 African nations, income per capita has more than doubled, which is like more of a holistic analysis than yours, which I'm sure only looks at like a few countries, right? So that just disproves your argument. Income per capita is actually increasing and people are getting lifted out of poverty.
That's not like my question though, right? My question isn't like whether or not income per capita has increased because it has increased. My question is about like the size of the increase. Like insofar as the rate of the increase in income per capita is smaller than the increase in GDP, why is your argument about low skilled workers true if the wealth gap clearly still exists and is still like being exacerbated?
So even if it's not perfect, our argument is that that gap would be a lot worse if West Africa hadn't urbanized in the first place and growth would be far lower. The key here is the comparative because we're not saying like, oh, urbanization is perfect. We're saying urbanization is better than the alternative, which is like not urbanizing at all or just sticking to rural areas. All right, so can I have a question? So your argument is about agriculture, right? And soon climate change is inevitable and that's going to lead to increases in temperatures, which is going to destroy a lot of crops. So how will West Africa be able to deal with that if there is no urbanization? They're solely dependent on agriculture.
I mean, it's not like a question of them being solely dependent on agriculture, like forever and ever, right? Like the analysis we make in summary is that like having an economy that is diverse in the first place is like the necessary starting point for long-term economic growth. But insofar as urbanization destroyed the chances of long-term diversification, like that's where like the real problems come in.
Well,
Right.
they are diversifying right now. Our evidence from 2020 indicates that Nigeria is moving into multiple other sectors.
Okay, but the question isn't like about them actually, it's not about them like attempting to move to other sectors. The question is like where are the exports actually coming from? Like where is the money actually coming from? And like that's from, it's still from oil, right? So
Yeah, the majority of it is
that's
from
our
oil,
argument.
but our evidence finds that they're shifting away from it. And that's just Nigeria. We say that like like other countries in West Africa aren't like that, and they're also diverse.
They are though. Like we give you two other examples, like Ghana and Liberia, for example.
Well, in addition, how does sticking to agriculture even lead to diversification in the first place? If they're dependent on agriculture, then they're dependent
It's
on
just that when you're dependent on like one export, like oil, for example, because it's based on boom and bust cycles, your economy is much more vulnerable to like
But
price.
agriculture is also one thing, and that's
But
super.
it's having the cushion.
Right,
Is the
that's-
important part.
Yo, Alex, I forgot to ask this. What was your front line on the living costs term? The first thing on your case.
So it was empirically disproven, and per capita income is more than doubled. And second, it's not offense because you're saying that you're saying that wages go to like goods and housing. You're not saying that like wages on a decline.
Okay. We'll take a little bit of prep. Okay. So the order is going to be the weighing first, and then our case, and then their case. Yeah. On the weighing, we're going to go for our long-term weighing, which indicates that whenever there's a 10% increase in the oil share of a country, there's a 7% decrease in their GDP in the long term because of oil shocks that happen as a result of the dependence on oil. The only thing they say is about reducing poverty. One, the evidence isn't even about West Africa. Second, there's no evidence as to why urbanization is ending poverty. There's no warning extended in summary. That means that the only piece of weighing that you actually have in the round is coming from our long-term weighing. Let's go to our case. Our first contention is about an oil-dependent West Africa. Our argument is extremely simple. Urbanization locked West Africa into an oil-dependent state where 90% of capital flows and trade come from oil exports. This destroys any hope of long-term growth because they're moving away from the agricultural-based economy. In fact, the impact is the destruction of growth. As the WB finds that Nigeria is dependent on oil for 90% of its exports, leaving the economy vulnerable to price shocks and instantaneous recession. Kakhanov explains that oil-driven economies are killed by regular oil busts, resulting in a 7% decrease in long-term GDP, which halters wages, spikes poverty, and breeds income inequality. All right. Let's go to the frontlining. The first thing they say is about climate change destroying like agriculture. One, China also has climate change affecting their crops, yet they were still able to diversify into agriculture. Second, there's adaptation technology coming into agriculture to make it better. You don't need oil. Finally, we would argue that poverty reduction needs to come first for future economic growth. To extend the FAO 12 evidence that finds that agricultural growth is 11 times more effective in reducing poverty than non-agricultural growth. Then go to the second thing that they extend. They say that there's been a 93% increase in like Nigerian agricultural exports. Agricultural exports. Our argument is very simple, and they drop Claire's first front line. Even if the agricultural exports are increasing, it's just a blip and it's not long term. They may be trying to go to other industries, but they can't because they're locked into oil. That's why oil takes up like a majority of their exports compared to everything else. They don't do the comparison between agriculture and oil. Oil is still far more. Let's go to their case. The only thing you need to extend is the turn on living costs. Our argument is that in the most expansive study, they find that there's a negative correlation between GDP and urbanization. Because of the page evidence finds that there's been an increase in living costs. That means that people in urbanized areas are unable to afford the things that they're paying for. They say that there's been a double in the amount of like per capita income. That doesn't respond because we're talking about the living costs that they had and not the wages. That also takes care of their second response where they say that wages are increasing. For all these reasons, we need to get.
Okay, I'm gonna call Alex. All right. Start on the weighing debate. Our C1 outweighs theirs in two ways. First, on scope. SMEs have created 70% of jobs in Nigeria, offering millions a way to generate income and lift themselves out of poverty. The neg never tells you how many people they affect. The scope weighing is unresponded to. Prefer this as a lens you breathe around in. Second, on time frame. CARS 20 indicates that rural poverty in Africa will decline by over 100 million over the next decade due to urbanization. From a long-term growth perspective, the next decade ending poverty for over 100 million people is objectively the best place to vote. This also responds to their weighing on long-term long-term and oil, because we say that in the long term we're still lifting more people out of poverty, even if the economy becomes more reliant upon oil. Onto their case, they extend one response in final focus. The first is that is a living cost turn. Two responses. Our argument is that urbanization has increased over 20%. That's why the African Development Bank finds that income per capita has more than doubled since 1990. But for our evidence over there, because it's long-term and more holistic, it takes into account the entirety of West Africa. They're just obviously not talking about the entire region. But second, this isn't even offense. At best, they're arguing there's no income increase in urban areas, but that wages goes towards goods or housing. This is not a place to vote for them. That being said, go to our first extension. The disparity between rural and urban areas regarding poverty is huge, and the key reason is economic growth. The Turok evidence in our labor specialization warrant explains that when people cluster in cities, they can more easily go to work and do specialized work, which boosts productivity and efficiency. The key reason you vote AF is off the Glacier evidence, which indicates that a 20% increase in urbanization doubles per capita income, which is why the CARS evidence finds urbanization will lift 100 million people out of poverty over the next decade. We're winning our case, and the scoping is conceded. The round is already over. But on their case, there are two reasons why you don't vote off their C1. First is a fully agricultural dependent economy is not a good thing in the long term. The effects of climate change are worse now than ever, which is why their China example doesn't make sense. Crops are going to die out, but for an economy that uses a variety of natural resources, not just crops. But second, the short-term growth matters. If long-term growth is the objective, why put all eggs in the basket that is doomed to fail? But second, Nigeria is diversifying. The ITAA evidence finds that as of this year, agricultural growth exports are up 93%, and they're going to increase in the long term, which responds to what they say about how it's just a blip. This is also terminal defense on their case, because progressively increasing diversification will eventually lead to an equal economy that is balanced and has sustainable long-term growth. It's a pretty clear off ballot.
All righty, so that is the conclusion of the debate round. What we're going to do now is, first of all, we're going to open up the chat for anyone to ask questions about the demo debate. I really want to encourage that you ask questions about the demo debate. If you have other questions about Integrum, you're welcome to reach out to us, but we would really prefer if for now we talk about the demo debate. Also, Sasha and I are going to give a quick breakdown of what happened in the round, and then some of the others are also going to give a quick breakdown. But we want to thank you all for coming. We're beyond thrilled that there were over 175 people here. So I'm going to open up the chat now, and you can now message me questions and we will field them. So yeah.
Yeah, again, just to echo what Andrew just said, thank you everyone for coming. It really means a lot to us. Just kind of giving a little bit of an overview on the style of the round, as well as what just went down. I know a lot of people were talking about how some of the speeches might have